review, okay, what we cover in this chapter. Okay, today's lecture is about production and growth, and this is in chapter 25th of the Mankiw textbook. I hope you have the file that I upload for the PowerPoint, and also you can look at your book that you borrow from library. There are several editions, but you can read from chapter edition 4 until the current edition. Okay, production and growth. This is the topic that we cover about how an economy grow in the long run. So in this chapter, we will looking at an economy, and we try to explain what determine the long run economic growth. As you can notice, countries with different economic development, people in that economy can have different standard of living. This chapter, Mankiw start with the typical family with their possessions. Like actually, we would see that how the standard of living of the UK. This is typical family in the UK or household. I guess the term typical family, this is the connection with the previous chapter that we learned about the cost of living. We want to measure the CPI, right? And that was the survey from the consumption behavior of the typical household. So this is like one indicator that how people in each country they possess and what are they consume per year. For the UK family, these are the things that they could consume in each year. The GDP per capita in, I think this is 2007, the real GDP per capita, it was about 30,000, and the life expectancy, 78. Almost all adults had education. For the Mexico, these are the things that the Mexico family in the middle income country, they consume per year. So you can see that real GDP per capita is 19,800. But some countries will be still very poor, like people in Mali. Actually, if you search in the internet, you would see that people in the country like Chad or some countries in the Africa, they are probably poorer than this. Anyway, these are the things that is occur in every day. People in different countries, on average, they have different setup of living. But what is important is like the GDP per capita, real GDP per capita, it can be one indicator for the typical consumer, how their life is, what is the standard of living for the people. So since there are difference in the economic growth, so we would like to see what it means, the economic growth. If you remember, we study on the GDP, it is about the production, right? The value of the production of a country. The factors that determine the economic growth, it is the ability to produce, and that is productivity. So by definition, productivity refers to the amount of goods services produced from each unit of labor input. You may recall what we learned in microeconomics, like production function is a function of labor and capital, right? That is in an individual firm. Since macroeconomics, we're looking at the economy as a whole, we would looking at the production function in a different aspect, as you will see later. So the standard of living for a country it is determined largely by the productivity of its workers. And in the past 15 years, we can see that since 1990 to 2004, we can see that countries around the world, they have different standard of living. That is measured by the GDP. And some countries like China, Singapore, Japan, they have achieved quite successful in terms of economic growth. So you can see the catching up of these countries as we will explain later. Okay, so living standard, this is measured by the GDP per person. And the poorest countries have the average level of income that have not been seen in the US for many decades. But the growth rate, that is quite important. In the last column in the table, you can see that the annual growth rate is like 2-3 something percent, right? But that is compound over a course of 30 years. So actually that is not small. If you read the history of Thai economy, I think from 1960 to 1995, Thai economy has been growing at the rate of like 7%. That is quite high. But after 1997, we struggled with the first Asian financial crisis. So that actually that reflects the strength of the Thai economy. What determines the strength or the competitive for each country? It is the productivity. So why it is so important? Because this is the key factors that determine the ability to produce the product of a country. If a country has high, the labor has high productivity, that means per unit of labor, that economy could produce the high value, right? So the labor would get the benefit from what they produce. Okay. What are the factors that determine the productivity? We discussed last time there are 4 main factors. The first one is the physical capital. Sometimes this is like what we study in the first chapter in macroeconomics. That is the investment, capital formation. The second is quite important as well. It is human capital and natural resources and technology knowledge. These are the key factors that determine productivity. Okay. So what is physical capital? If you remember when we discussed about the GDP, you remember the I, right? Investment. Investment, actually there are 3 types. The first one is about housing. The second one is about equipment, machine, and probably the factory, the building, and others. And the last one is about inventory. Okay? So for the long run economic growth, I think the key point is the physical capital, the capital formation. So why physical capital? It is important because by definition, physical capital is like a tool that can expand the ability of human, expand the ability of labor. But in fact, in the factory, you have the the crane, you have the stamping machine, you have the welding machine, you have several tools in your production, right? So in that case, the physical capital, it can help the firm and the economy to produce higher value added at shorter time. So this is the key. So the physical capital, it is also important because it can be used to produce the new vintage of the equipment, okay? Since you have the old capital and then you build a new machine, that means the economy can realize economic growth with the newer and higher efficient machine as well. So this is the importance of physical capital. For human capital, this is the knowledge and skill that workers acquire through education, training, and experience. So not only formal education, but the training at the firm, it is also play an important role. After you graduate, you join the factory, you need to learn what is routines. It is called operation or organization routines. What should you do? What you should not do, right? What is the best method for that factory? Even the same product that produced in company A, they may have best practice different from company B because inside the organization, they are different. And this is quite important. It is not less important than the physical capital. You should remember that production function, it uses both factors, labor and capital in combination to produce goods and services. So physical capital is important, but not less important. It is human capital, and probably this is quite very important factors of production. The third one is natural resources, to stand for everything that provided by nature. If you have abundant land, then you can have more area to construct, to do agriculture, or to do manufacturing, right? Or mineral deposits. But if you're looking at the natural resources, there are two types, renewable and non-renewable. And it's quite important for the non-renewable because sustainability, we should have forests, we should have good quality of air and water, right? So this is quite important. But even though natural resources like mineral, oil, and others that is deposited in the earth, like petroleum, they are valuable. But we can see that some countries with no natural resources, they can develop their economy as well, like Singapore or Japan. So even though they are important, but they are not necessary for an economy to be highly productive in producing goods and services. Singapore is a good example. Okay. So the last one, it is technological knowledge. This includes society's understanding for the best way to produce goods and services. So it's like human capital, it includes the labor, right? The skill embedded in labor. But technological knowledge is like the society. Okay, so this is bigger. And when we want to see an example, I think this one I gave last time, right? Up to this point about the rice productivity. I think the rice productivity is quite a good example to see why two countries produce the same primary product like rice, okay? They are so different. Okay, for Japan in 1980, they produced 4 tons per hectare. While in Thailand, about 1.2 tons per hectare. So it's like almost 4 times different. So in this case, if you see the use of the resources, use the same amount of land, by the same amount of time, Japan can produce 4 times more than China, okay, in terms of area. The second, because during rice or farm, they need to use both land and labor, okay? The amount of output per day work for Japanese farmer, again, it's 4 times higher. So in terms of land use, labor service, you can see that productivity in Japan is higher. Since Japanese farmers produce more than Thai farmers, in this case, if we try to explain this in terms of productivity, it means Japan can make more product than Thai. Okay? Both countries, they are different in terms of the industrial development, economic development. Even in 1980, the wage in Japan is about 15 to 18 times higher than Thai workers. So why it is so different? Because in Japan in 1980s, Japanese industry already they faced labor shortage, right? Since the labor cost is high like this, so they have to build capital instead of using labor in their production. For example, in automobile industry, they use a lot of automation since 80, but in Thai, we still use labor. So the same is true for Thailand. Since in the Thailand, the wage is quite low, so the production they can use more labor than Japan, right? So these are the picture for the Thai farmer in 80. So you can see that because we have very low labor costs, this is the way they grow rice. Okay. You can rarely see any tractor in the process, right? No equipment, even when they harvest the rice. So I think in Cambodia 80 we see the same. At present also? Okay. But in Thailand you can see around Thammasat University, you can see that a lot of the large plot of land that grow rice and they use the equipment, right? Recently, yeah. In the past 10 years, we shift to more capital in farming. Rice farming in Thailand. And this is what Japanese farmers do. In November or December, when they harvest the rice, this is what they do. But this picture, I took it by myself, but it's not 80, but this is about 1999. One farmer can do a lot, large plot of land. This is on the way to my university. And he spent like less than 1 hour. I think about 40 minutes he can complete the whole area. And this is also happened since 80. Just different vintage of the machine, but they use a lot of capital even in the rice farming. Okay. So recall what we learned, the production function. Okay, please looking at this. Economists use production function to describe the relationship between quantity of inputs used in production and the quantity of output, right? But in terms of macroeconomics, these are the general form of production function. We try to include all factors. You remember? We have 4 factors that determine the productivity. The first one is physical capital. I use K, okay? The second one is human capital. The last one is natural resources and technology, right? Okay? So K, it is here. human capital, it is the quality, right, of the labor. We use H. N, natural resources. And then the A is technology. So you do not have to worry about this. We just try to explain what we learned in micro, and we use the terminology for macro. Okay? So the production function is like output. It is determined by how the industry or the economy combine these four inputs together, and the state of technology will be like the multiplier. Okay? So the higher the technology, the A, the coefficient, the larger the production. Given the same level of labor, capital, human capital, and natural resources. So better technology, we can achieve higher level of output. Just that, okay? But the point is here. If we write, we want to see that how the production function can, it can tell how the output can grow if we add more inputs by the fraction of x, small x here. The x here is like, we want to see that if x like 10% increase in labor, the number of workers, like the labor force, 10% increase in capital formation, 10% increase in human capital, and we can have 10% increase in natural resources. We should achieve constant return to scale, like x, the proportion of x to the initial output before changing, right? So it's like if we double everything, the output should be double. This is the concept of constant returns to scale. Okay. So the production function is like with the constant returns to scale, we will have this implication. So we try to set x equal to 1 over L. Then we will have the production function like this. Please notice on the left-hand side here, y over L. What does this mean? Actually, this is the output per worker, right? Since y is income for the economy, so this can be stand for GDP. The L can be just, if it is a population, so it is GDP per capita, right? So the GDP, real GDP per capita, it depends on several factors, and the difference of the economic growth can be seen, right? So this case is like GDP per capita. It is a function of these. K over L is quite important. The ratio of capital over labor. So if some economy has had done less capital formation, they will have low K over L, right? For example, in countries like, I think in Cambodia and Laos, you use less capital. So in that case, you have low level of K over L. In Thailand, in the past 30 years, we have low level of this, but currently we are shifting to more capital intensive, right? So the second one is human capital per worker. So the higher the skill, the higher the ability, the higher the experience of the worker that reside in population, it can increase the output per worker, right? And the last one is natural resources, but we know that natural resources, it is important, but it's not so important. It is not necessary for an economy to grow. So actually we would think about these two terms and also the technology, right? So in this case, in order to promote economic growth, the government should do some policy to improve these factors. Okay, so this is the role of the public policy. The government policies can raise productivity and living standard by doing these things. The first one, encourage saving and investment. This is to look at the importance of capital formation. Because investment, it is a form of capital formation, and the higher the investment, it means the productivity would rise, right? But investment cannot be possible without saving. We will see this in the next chapter. The second, encourage investment from abroad. This expands our scope of analysis to cover the international sector. If Thai entrepreneur if they have less experience in doing manufacturing, so they do not want to, they do not know what investment they should make, right? Or they would not have the technology. So in this case, we can rely on the foreign sectors to invest in Thailand. The third one is about education. So this is on human capital. The fourth is about the political stability, because economic and political stability is important for investors to expand their investment, right? And the fifth is to promote free trade. And the last one is promote research and development. So this is the promote technology, right? Okay, we will see each of these. One way to raise future productivity is to invest more current resources in production of capital. So in order to increase productivity, the society must sacrifice or trade off between current consumption for future consumption, right? So that means the economy must have some saving, and then that saving can be transmitted to the sector that want to use that saving. That is for investment. The growth rate, 1960 to 1990, you can see that several countries on the top three, they were starting their economic development in 1940, 50, and 60. For example, Japan, 1945, the end of World War II, right? Japanese economy was seriously damaged. Okay? Singapore, 1960, they start their economic development. South Korea, the end of the Korean War is about the end of 1950s. So 1960 would be the starting point, right? But why these countries can achieve very high compound economic growth rate in 30 years, like 7%. You're looking at the right-hand side, you would see that these three countries, they invest a lot of their GDP in each year, right? So about 20 to 30%. So it's like 100 baht. Every 100, the value of their GDP. 30% they've spent on capital formation, investment. So this explains why capital formation of these three countries had initiated or to kick off the economic growth since 60, right? But in the textbook, if you're looking at South Korea and United States, okay, or West Germany, you will see that these three countries, they spent on investment almost the same level, 20 to 28%, right? But how the growth rate was realized, it's different. In the US, the growth rate is quite small, just less than 2% in the past 30 years. I mean, during this 30-year period. What explains this? We use the concept of diminishing returns and the catching up effect. The diminishing return is like as the country had accumulated a lot of capital already, then and the economy has been developed for a long time, right? So the more on additional capital that the country like West Germany or United States accumulate during that 3 decades, it translates into less economic growth. But in the long run, we should be careful that this is not saying that saving is not important. Even though we have diminishing return in investment, it doesn't mean that the country should not have saving and investment. We should do saving and we should accumulate more capital, right? So this is the how to illustrate the production function. For example, in 1960, in that 3 decades, the status of Korea, Japan, and Singapore, they may be at a certain level of this. So the 1 unit of capital accumulate, it may translate a lot of to the growth in the output, right? But the same situation, when Germany or United States, they already achieved the high value, right? So the additional 1 unit of the physical capital accumulated, it translates to small increase in the productivity like this. So it's just a state of economic development. It's just a state of capital formation for a different country. Okay? So the catching up effect, this refers to the property whereby countries that start off poor tend to grow more rapidly than countries that start off rich. Currently, we should do the same. And you can compare even in ASEAN. You can see that Singapore is already achieved high economic growth, right? Malaysia. If you look at the mainland ASEAN, like Thailand, Cambodia, Myanmar, Laos, and Vietnam, you can see that Vietnam has accumulated a lot of physical capital and attract a lot of FDI, right? So now economic growth in Vietnam is quite impressive. So the catch up will be the same. Cambodia should have high economic growth than Thailand for sure, right? If we understand this. So the second is investment from abroad. As I said, the government can increase capital accumulation not only by providing incentive for domestic investor or the businessman in the country, right? They can also do this through the investment from foreign. And there are 2 types. The first one is foreign direct investment. You may have seen this, right? The FDI. Have you seen this term? So this stands for foreign direct investment. And the second one is foreign portfolio investment. What is the difference between the 2? Which one is more important to the economy? You know, portfolio investment is like the money that flow from countries to country. And that money try to find the capital gain by investing in financial assets, like stocks, government bond, or other securities, right? So it's like the money flow in and flow out quite quickly. And that money just come to finance or something without any changing or providing information of how to operate the company. For example, US company may invest in Thai company like PTT, but they cannot change how PTT operate, right? But FDI is different. FDI is like if Toyota from Japan invests in Thailand, they need to set up factory. They need to transfer how they do business. They need to transfer how the car is produced, how to develop the car, how to sell, how to maintain. For example, these things are the knowledge embedded in the foreign investor, right? Not only in car business, actually there are others like banking system, IT, or so in this case, if we talk about the FDI, we should looking at the capital investment that owned and operate by foreign entities. So we expect that there will be some knowledge spill over from this, and this will result in capital formation and human capital formation in the economy. The third one is education. For countries' long-run growth, education is at least as important as investment in physical capital because this one it will increase the human capital. Okay? So the higher the education level of the people in the economy, we assume that those students would have higher ability to produce good services, right? Because educated person might generate new ideas about how best to produce goods and services. And this, in turn, it might enter society's pool of knowledge provided by an extra benefit to the others. So the more educated person in the economy, we would be able to realize the benefit to others. Even though some countries that have a good education system, but that country probably, unfortunately, could not have the job to fill those workers. So what will happen if you were living in those countries? If you graduate from this department, but no job available, like in Philippines, they produce a lot of doctor and nurse and healthcare workers, right? But since the economy in Philippines, they could not find a good paid job, so they flew to other countries like in the US, worked there and sent money back to Philippines. In Thailand, we have the same. Since we developed the economy for 60, 70 years, right? And we encounter or we face the continuously increase in wage rate. So how can we find workers? If you remember in 2012, 2013, the wage in Thailand was increased from 200 something to 300 baht per day, right? And that caused a lot of problem to our neighboring country. When the wage raised to 300 baht per day, a lot of foreign workers want to enter into job market, especially from Myanmar, right? So in this case, we may say that since Myanmar economy 10 years ago, they do not have job available, right? So many of the workers, like some of them, they may be university graduate. They come to work in Thailand. So this is a problem of brain drain for those economy. But now you can see that in Thailand, the economy is struggling, but the opportunity for neighboring country now is growing, right? So these workers, they accumulate their experience, then they can contribute to their economy. Health and nutrition, okay. Of course, if you have poor people, they cannot afford adequate healthcare and nutritious food. So the country will get caught in the vicious cycle. So this is true for the African, right? Okay, property rights and political stability. The property rights refer to the ability of people to exercise the control over the resources they own. So this is quite important because as an investor, once you invest in a project or you set up a factory, you should be able to claim the right over the investment you made, right? If the property right is not secure, then investor will have less incentive to accumulate more physical capital. Not only the property rights on those tangible goods, actually intangible is also important, like intellectual property right. And also political stability. This is very important for the investors to feel their investment is secure. But I think globally, political instability is the norm, right? Because now we are under the pandemic of the COVID-19, so it is not secure. Free trade. So this is quite interesting. You know, when we talk free trade, it means we are in open economy, right? When we talk about open economy, it means we have X and M on net export. We can export or import. And how this contribute to the economic growth? You think about import. Because each country, they have different capability. They have completely different resource endowment. So each country would have comparative advantage in different products. For developing economy or latecomer, they would have a lot of labor. So once the country has a lot of labor, they should export labor intensive, right? Like garments, like agricultural products. For Cambodia, I think garment is one of the key industry. Still? Okay, so this is a good example because in Thailand in 1970, we were the same. We were the key producer in garments. But since the wage has been rising over time, garment industry need to adjust, right? And then we move to machinery equipment, automobile, motorcycle, electronic and electrical products. But eventually, most of the labor intensive like television or electrical appliance, they will move to China, to Vietnam and to Malaysia. And garments, some will move to Laos and Cambodia, right? The point that I want to raise is here. When we are in the open economy, we do not only import consumer goods, we can import capital goods as well, right? The country can export the product that they have comparative advantage. And the second, they can import the thing that they cannot produce, but those products like equipment, they are embedded with better technology, right? So in this case, trade in some way is a type of technology by this sense. And if we promote free trade, try to reduce tariff, reduce the non-tariff barrier, the volume of trade would be higher, okay? So in this case, trade can promote the economy. And there are two kinds of policy towards free trade. Some country, they may adopt the policy called inward-oriented trade policy. What is inward-oriented trade policy? It's like a country that do not want to have interact with other countries, like they tend to lower the interaction. So it's like they do not close the economy, but they try to protect and they care about the domestic production. And the other one is outward-oriented trade policy. These countries, they adopt a policy that encourages interaction with other countries, like lower the tariff, export and import. Okay? And it is proof that outward-oriented trade policy would result in higher economic growth. But this is the case that the country must have the capital formation as well, right? And the last one is about the R&D, research and development. Because I think we all accept or admit that technological knowledge is so important. And in order to achieve the new technology, you need to do R&D. And the R&D itself is quite an activity that is uncertain. Uncertainty is very high. You need to do a lot of scientific research to come up with the basic knowledge. Since R&D is very risky and high uncertainty, without government support, it is quite impossible to success in this. So the government can do two things. The first one, they can encourage the firm to do R&D by giving tax incentive. The tax incentive is like if the company allocate resources for R&D activity, they can claim, as expenditure, so they pay less tax. And some countries may offer 200%. For example, if they spend 1 million baht, they can claim as expenditure as 2 million. So this will save a lot of income tax for that corporate. And the second one is like the government can help or encourage R&D by impose strict property rights like the patent law or IPR. Okay? With the protection by law, the firm may have higher confidence to develop new things. Okay? Because they know that the government will protect their property. So that is the six activities that the government or the public policy can address in order to improve the higher economic growth in the long run. Okay, the last slide, I think it's just a debate whether or not the population growth will have positive or negative impact on the economic growth. The first one is like the negative impact, like Malthus law, like population increase faster than the growth of the natural resources. So at the end, we would not have economic growth because the natural resources will not be sufficient. So in the long run, no economic growth because we're stretching the natural resources. The second is about diluting the capital stock. It's like the concept that the higher the number of population, the share of KOL will decrease. Then economic growth may not be achieved. So this is the debate on the second topic. And the last one is quite different. They think about the opposite way. It's like the more population, the more opportunity for the labor can engage in discussion and transmit knowledge. So the transmission of knowledge or technology can be faster and more efficient. Okay, this is the topic for this chapter. But once I read this, there was no YouTube and how people can transmit knowledge at that time. When Toyota invests in China, how Toyota trains Thai workers? The only way is send engineer to China and train, right? And how Toyota, if they have the best practice in the US, how Toyota train workers in China, they need to ask from US to come to China and train, right? So Toyota tried to overcome this by investing in their intra-company IT system. It's like YouTube today. It is called Global Production Center that all the workers in Toyota can access the best practice of Toyota to see how job A, they may have 1,000 operations or 10,000 operations, right? But Toyota try to keep the best practice for each operation. Then they use that video to train workers in different locations in the world. That was, I think, 2003, 2005, before YouTube. I was impressed when I visited Toyota and I saw that after 2001, we were selected as the Global Production Center for Asia Pacific at that time. So once YouTube appeared, and then Google took over YouTube, and now you can see that you can get a lot of ideas from YouTube, right? So knowledge sharing become easier and costless. So I think looking at the promoting technological progress, not only the number of population, but I think the cost of transmitting information is more important. So now, currently, and from now on, the development in IT, in information technology communication, I think this will improve the knowledge sharing opportunity. So people in different countries, if they have access to the internet and they have a good background in education, I think they can catch up with others with less, how can I say, it is not less effort, less resources, but it is quite likely that we will see many firms can catch up, right? It is not necessary to concentrate only in the developed economy. Okay, so this is the new trend that I can say that it will be fast moving and challenging for all of us. Okay, any question? So from the first three chapters, we start with GDP, then CPI, and then production and growth, right? In this chapter, and actually the key point is how an economy can achieve the long-run economic growth. It's because of productivity. And public policy to improve this, there are several, but we will touch upon some of them, like capital formation and foreign direct investment. These two things will be covered for sure. Next week, we will start, we will discuss on how to promote saving investment, and then we will move to the role of money, the role of monetary policy, and then international trade. Okay, any question? Any? Okay, so see you next week.